Hello everyone, I'm Linda Hayes and today I'm going to talk about real estate investing for people that maybe haven't been started into it yet. So my background is that I'm a chartered accountant and I started investing in real estate in 2006 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And the way I started this was by building a brand new rental house. I've bought and sold many properties over the years and I focus on suited homes, basement suites and garden suites, and I've also been investing in short-term rentals since 2017. This year in 2020, I've also started building properties in Belize. And when I started real estate investing, I didn't actually start with any personal cash. I used the equity on my personal residence and got a HELOC on it. And that can be a really good way to get in the market if you have equity in a property now. So the things I want to talk about today is why would I want to invest in real estate? I'll also cover some of the risks with real estate investing. I'm going to talk about what should be included in a rental budget. I'm going to talk about what type of investment. Should you consider single-family homes, condos, townhouses, or houses with separate suites? I'm going to cover the due diligence rules you should follow. So in my case, it would be the City of Edmonton rules and the Alberta rules. And you want to make sure you protect yourself from problems. I'm going to cover how you pick the right area to invest in. And I'm going to talk about what resources are out there, both for purchasing a property and as a landlord. So why do I invest in real estate? One of the most important reasons is the power of leverage. This is a key in magnifying your returns. So the bank finances the majority of the investment, and in Canada we need a 20% down payment for a rental property. That means that the bank is financing 80% of your investment, of course assuming you can get this kind of financing. So here's an example where I am buying a $400,000 investment, and let's assume it gives a 10% return. So if I have a real estate investment for $400,000, which is leveraged, my mortgage is going to be $320,000, so the cash I pay, the 20%, is $80,000. And that compares to a non-leveraged investment where, of course, the cash that I pay is $400,000. So my income on both options is the 10%, $40,000 on the investment. But the cash I paid in is, of course, different. I only paid $80,000 for the real estate project. I paid $400,000 for the non-leveraged investment, and that's where my returns are magnified. So I actually have a 50% return on the real estate because I made $40,000 on my $80,000 investment, whereas of course I have a simple rate of return of 10% on my non-leveraged investment. So that is a key thing to factor in when you're looking at real estate as an investment. So some other benefits of real estate. Tenants cover the cost of the mortgage, which generates equity. It's also a forced savings plan. This builds future cash flow and wealth. In Canada, it's also tax deferred because we can claim depreciation, which CRA calls CCA, capital cost allowance, and that reduces your income. And generally, we have to pay this back on sale. Hopefully, our property is actually appreciated in value. So if we're claiming an expense for depreciation, but it actually goes up, we have to pay that back when we sell the property. But that's the time we have cash anyway. So it is a deferral, which is still a good thing. So the sources of profit, if you have buy and hold real estate. Obviously, there's the monthly cash flow, which is important. Mortgage principal pay down, that is going to be a return as well when you sell the property. The mortgage is less. And you could have appreciation, but this isn't guaranteed. Flipping properties is something that people also do as well. And this can be a high return, but it's also very high risk. And it's best to do a rental budget in case you need to rent out the property until the market rebounds. So for example, if you bought a property, you did a budget to flip it, looked great, something changed, you might need to rent it until the market goes back up. One warning is if you're buying properties to resell them, that's called business income, not capital gains. So you're taxed at 100% of the gain. So for example, if you made $100,000, you're taxed on $100,000. Whereas if I had buy and hold real estate and I made $100,000 on the increase in value, I'd only pay tax on 50% of that. And so those are the rules in Canada. Obviously, depending where you're investing, it may be different. So some other risks to consider. The economy could decline. Obviously, that impacts us a lot in terms of if we're trying to sell something. Also, people just say, well, what if I'm not selling it, but the property goes down in value? Well, in my case, I don't care about this for any of my buy and hold real estate. As long as I'm still cash flowing the property or even just breaking even, I'm still making money because I'm having that mortgage paid down. So I don't worry about ups and downs in value because that only matters when you're selling the property. People say, what if I buy a property and it doesn't cash flow? Well, that means you didn't do a proper budget. As long as you're doing a proper budget, your property should cash flow. So you do need to do a lot of research, but this shouldn't be a problem. You could get a bad tenant, that's true, but you can mitigate that by doing proper rental applications. So sometimes things still go wrong, and we'll talk about how to deal with that later on, but generally speaking, if you do proper screening, you shouldn't have this happen a lot. Phone calls in the middle of the night are another thing people are worried about. In my case, investing since 2006, I've actually only had one phone call that I talked to a tenant around midnight. I was actually up because it was a weekend. They had finished moving into the brand new property, took a shower, and water was leaking in their kitchen through the dining room light. Obviously a critical thing to deal with, and in that case I called the builder. They happened to answer right away, told the tenant to turn off the water, and they went to fix it the next day. I do provide my tenants with emergency contact numbers for plumbers and those kind of things because that is critical, but I don't have my phone on when I go to bed at night. Another thing people talk about is not having the time to invest, and obviously we can hire people to help with this, so time really shouldn't be a concern. So in terms of budgeting, you always need to ensure your property will have positive cash flow. This is an investment, so it doesn't matter how good of a deal the property is. Unless you're buying for resale purposes specifically, then it's a different ballgame. Here I'm covering buy and hold real estate though, so obviously we don't care about how good of a deal it is as long as it cash flows. The other thing is that although the property may appreciate, it's hard to predict the amount. And so what I do is I exclude appreciation from my expected returns, especially we know that the property may actually decrease if we bought at a peak or if the economy declines later on. Many investors do put a 2% appreciation factor in, so you need to be aware of that. If you get budgets from other people, you need to make sure you know what they're including in it before you decide to buy a property. So there's different ways to calculate returns. There's not one steadfast way. So all you need to do is ensure you're consistent when you're comparing alternatives. So you also do not want to rely on someone trying to sell you something. If you have a budget from someone trying to sell a property, you know they're going to try to paint the property in the best possible light. So you need to do your own calculations to make sure it's a good deal. And if you don't know how to do that, hire someone who does. There's a lot of different people that can help you with making sure what you're buying is a good investment. You should also put money into a reserve account to have cash in case the tenant pays late or if you have a vacancy. So 3 months rent is a good reserve account to have, although with COVID now, a lot of people have been saying it would have been much better to have a lot more. So if you're a little concerned and you want to be conservative, maybe have 6-month rent as a reserve in case you have problems. So some factors on budgeting to consider. So doing a budget is critical to ensure positive cash flow. If you already have negative cash flow, it only gets worse if you have a vacancy or something unplanned happens. So things you need to factor into your budget. Obviously your mortgage payments, even though you're, for tax purposes in Canada, you can only deduct the interest on the mortgage. For our cash budget, we need to include the full mortgage payment. We also include property taxes, insurance, utilities if they're not paid by the tenant, vacancy, repairs and maintenance, which you'd put into a savings account, and condo fees as well, if they're applicable if you're buying a condo. If you finance your down payment, you would need to include the line of credit interest in your budget. Also, a property management fee. So in Edmonton, generally, we pay 10% for property managers. And one question I have people ask is, well, should I include this if I'm self-managing the property? And the answer is yes, you should. If you are self-managing, you might do it for the reason that your work is worth 10%, so you include it. The other thing is that if you're going to expand your business, maybe you can self-manage 3 properties, maybe even 5 if you do it full-time, maybe more. But let's say you get to the stage where you own 100 rental properties. Obviously, you cannot self-manage all of these, so if you've put the property management fee in all of them, as long as you have that in, you can change to have a property manager at any point and the property will still cash flow. The next thing I want to cover is what type of property should you consider? I'm using brand new West Edmonton homes in Edmonton for the following analysis. I'm not saying you have to have brand new houses. This is just what I invest in, so I'm more familiar with it, so I'm using this in this example. So I'm assuming a 3-bedroom unit is expected to rent for $1,600. And in 2020, a new starter home that I'd use as a rental currently costs around $370,000. Depends, of course, on the lot and the size of the home you're buying. So let's assume you have 3 brand new properties you're considering. And these prices are actually from an example I had when I was working with an investor on buying a property. And she had told me that, oh, there's a great townhouse for only $313,000. It's a great deal. So what I looked at here is a house that you could maybe get for $350,000. So we said the price was $370,000, but let's say you could find a house for $350,000, which isn't unlikely if there's good deals out there. The townhouse I already mentioned for $313,000, and then there was also a house that I could have built at the time with a basement suite that would have cost $480,000. In this example, I used a mortgage rate of 3.69% and a 30-year amortization. Now, again, these numbers are just examples, just to compare alternatives. So you can use any numbers for any type of property in any market you want. You just have to put your actual numbers in. So for the single family home, I can get it for $350,000. It's worth $370,000. Seems like a great deal as a, discount. However, when I do the numbers, I look at my down payment, I had to pay $70,000. If I wanted a 3-month rental reserve, it would be $4,800 on my rental that I'm getting for $1,600 a month. I factored in my mortgage payment. My mortgage has property tax, obviously, as well in it separately here. You could sometimes have it with both, but in this case, it's separate. I have my insurance as well in the budget. In my case, I didn't put utilities because on a single family home, the tenant's normally paying their utilities. I put 3% R&M. This is a new property under warranty. That's why it's a low number, but you obviously on a pre-owned property, this might be more like 10% that you'd need to put in here. In this example, I put 2% vacancy. You put whatever the vacancy you expect in the area you're investing in. In my case, I have had I've had no vacancy really since I've been investing in my new houses because I usually can find someone before the other person even moves out. So I have a low number in here, but depending on the type of property and where you're located, this would generally be higher. But again, I'm using the same numbers for all my comparisons, so it doesn't really matter what the numbers are as long as you're comparing apples to apples. And you can see here, despite me using low numbers for vacancy and R&M, and I put my 10% property management, I actually have negative cash flow in this example. So negative $231 means I can't even buy this property. Even though it's $350,000, it's not a good investment because I have to pay for it every month. That's not an investment, so you don't want to consider it. When I bought my first property in 2006, this same house cost $250,000, not $350,000. And obviously at that time, the numbers looked pretty good compared to what they would now, which is why I had to change my investing philosophy. Now I'm showing the budget for the townhouse that was $313,000. On this one, the down payment is lower. We kept the rent the same, which is quite common where we get the same rent on a townhouse as we do for a single family home. Have all the same kind of numbers in here, but the difference primarily on this townhouse compared to the single family home is the condo fees. So in this particular example, the condo fees were $250 per month, and that makes the monthly cash flow even worse. So it's negative $321, and that $321 deficit means this is worse than the house. Obviously, this wouldn't be an investment I'd want to pursue. Lastly, I'm going to show the house with the suite. So obviously the price is a lot higher here. It's $480,000. Down payment is much higher at 20%, so it's $96,000. And our reserve account, we have 2 rental suites now. That's the primary difference. So we have this basement suite here. It's getting rent at $1,000. We still have our main floor rent at $1,600 in this example. And this was a realistic case at the time when I did this analysis where we could get the same for a main floor as we could for a single family home. A little different now that our economy is different, and I have a other presentation I'm going to do kind of on more updated numbers on what we get for basement suites and single family homes, because the $1,600 is probably conservative for a single family home nowadays because I'm getting about $1,800 for them. Nevertheless, this was an example at the time. And the key to show here is that our monthly cash flow for the first time out of these 3 examples is actually positive, which is obviously the most important thing for a real estate investment. It's only $56, not a huge amount of cash flow, but remember that we have mortgage pay down on this as well. So that's very important because that's part of our profit as well. And as long as this number is 0, I don't really care. As long as I have enough of a contingency in my budget, to cover what if things happen in the future. And so this is the first one that actually works. So what we care about is really a comparison of the options. So the single family home has a negative cash flow, $231, still actually does have a return on investment. I paid $74,800 for the project, and because I get mortgage pay down as well as my cash flow, that means I get 3.8% return on investment. Townhouse, 1.8% with the negative cash flow, obviously less of a return because of the condo fees in there. And then the house with the basement suite has $56 of cash flow like we showed, has a higher down payment with the reserve fund, but of course our return is very good here. It's 8.1%, which most people would say is a fairly good return. A little better than, for sure better than what you can get in the bank for a return. So again, this analysis is what you can do for any combination of different properties you're looking to buy. Just use your own numbers. This just shows why I moved into suited investing, because it was the only thing that would cash flow in the Edmonton market. If you're in a market where single family homes cash flow, go for it. In Edmonton, currently, they do not cash flow. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is due diligence. So you have to research the neighborhood carefully before buying. So in my case, I use the City of Edmonton website to find stats about the area. So the website has demographics, income levels, etc. I also use the Edmonton Police Crime Stats website. Now, the key is there's crime everywhere, so you have to use benchmarks to compare areas. What I do is I look at where I live. I consider that a safe area, look at the type of crime that happens there and the amount of it, and then I can compare to different areas I would invest in to see if I consider that that would also be a safe area. I also research rents on Kijiji or other websites, so Rent Faster, Rent Board are a couple that I often use, and there you can see what current properties rent for in the same area, so you can use that in your rental budget. The best growth is often near large infrastructure projects. So if you do have something coming in, it's a good time to invest because realtors say that the value goes up by about 10 to 15% when you have new infrastructure such as our new LRT that's going in Edmonton. So the one that's going to the West End is something that I factored in when I decided to invest in Lewis Estates and Rosenthal on the West End. Another thing you need to do is screen potential tenants. So you need to use a rental application and get income verification. I use a website called Neighborly, which actually does a credit check. It costs $25 to use Neighborly, and they do a whole rental report for the landlord that goes through whether, what the risks are associated with that particular tenant. And you can either choose to charge the tenant the $25 or you can pay it. So depending on what the tenant will agree to, you can do it either way. Most times I get the tenant to pay the $25 and I tell them that they'll take it off the first month's rent, just so that if they change their mind and don't want to go ahead with the rent, I'm not out the $25. Another thing I do is if you have an issue, you need to deal with it right away. So one thing I do is an eviction notice. The first day rent is late. Even though I don't want to evict the tenant, like if they say, hey, I'm going to pay on the 5th of the month because my check is late, well, if I wait until later to do the eviction, I need to give 14 days notice, so clear days in Alberta, to get rid of the tenant. If I give them the notice on the 1st and they pay within that 14-day notice period, then the eviction notice isn't valid anyway. So I let them know that as long as they do pay, it's fine. I just do it so that way if they don't end up paying, they do have to be out by that first date that I set on the 1st of the month. Another thing that is very good that we have in Edmonton is the Residential Tenancy Dispute Board. It costs only $75 to take a case to the Residential Tenant Board, and you basically have a hearing similar to what would happen in court, but a lot cheaper and a lot easier to do. And in this case, I've went many times to get money either because tenants didn't pay rent and I wanted to evict them, any kind of situation where damages at the end, all those kind of things. I've had a lot of success using this method of getting things from the tenant. And the tenant does end up paying back the $75 if your case is successful and you ask for that. So in all my cases, I have claimed the cost of the $75 and I have got it. So suites in Edmonton are allowed, but you need to check rules of where you're buying if you're not in Edmonton. Every municipality is different and every country is different. So what I do when I'm buying property is in the contract, I say subject to city approval of the suite. And that makes sure that the builder gets permits for everything. I don't know necessarily all the rules, or well, in Edmonton I do generally know the rules, but if you don't know the rules and you have this in the contract, you make sure the builder gets permits for everything that they're doing. You also need to ensure all rules are known, because if you miss one item that's expensive to change, the property will have an illegal suite which can be shut down if a complaint's made. So we need fireproofing, we need 2 parking spaces in Edmonton, it used to be 3. You need 2 furnaces when you have a suite, you need large egress windows, and you need a separate entrance. In one case, I had a friend that I met through investing who actually built a suite where the builder wouldn't do it, so she told them what needed to be roughed in, and she didn't know about fireproofing, that was a requirement, and that meant that she could actually not ever make it a legal suite because it was too hard to fireproof afterwards because the furnace room is really, really tight. She wouldn't be able to go in and do it after the fact. So when I did my suite, that's exactly the same as the one she did. I had got the fireproofing and everything done, and I got the separate suite permit quite easily with the city afterwards. The other thing to note is that rules change all the time, so it's hard to keep up with. So some examples, in 2018, suites started to be allowed in duplexes in Edmonton. Before that, they weren't, even though there was a lot of illegal ones already. Also in 2018, garden suites are no longer discretionary use. In garden suites, they're often called laneway homes, garage suites, other terms. In the past, a letter had to go out to the neighbors whenever you were building a garden suite. Now, starting in 2018, those were allowed everywhere. In 2019, tiny homes as garden suites were allowed as well. There are restrictions. You still can't have tiny homes on wheels unless you take off the wheels and you have to affix it to the foundation in Edmonton. You also have to connect to city utilities, so you're not allowed off-grid living. But all these things are different depending where you're investing. It's very important that you know the rules. So to summarize some of the things we've talked about, make sure you always do a budget. That's very important. Decide whether you want a property manager and research options and prices. Ensure you always research the property and the area. So there is a system in Edmonton called the City of Edmonton SLIM system. I've put the link to it here if you want to look at it in the website. And the great thing about this is it shows the lot size, shows assessed values of the property, shows zoning, shows schools and transit stations nearby. So this is great when you're investing to see kind of the neighborhood you're investing in. Also, make sure you have a good team of people when you're investing in real estate. So either a good builder or realtor, a good lawyer, and a good accountant. A lot of lawyers are experienced with properties, but if you're doing something creative like an agreement for sale, which I've done recently on my purchases in Belize and a sale of a house with a garden suite in Edmonton, then you really need a special lawyer that kind of knows how to do those types of deals. So another thing to do, of course, is research your potential tenants like we talked about, confirm their income, check their references, and also be skeptical. I've had a lot of people that have told me someone's a landlord, and when I do my own checking on their address, it turns out that is definitely not the landlord for the Boardwalk building they live in. So a lot of times people just use friends, and you definitely have to be skeptical. Now I want to provide some resources that you can use for further learning. So there's a Edmonton Real Estate Investors Association that I'm on the board for. This is the link to them. It's on Meetup. This is the link you can check, and they have monthly meetings that you can attend right now virtually. There's also Mogul Mastermind. They have events every month in Edmonton as well at the last Wednesday of every month, and those are available virtually. And they've recently came back to having in-person ones just in September 2020, and they have still the virtual option as well. Then there is also the Real Estate Investment Network that has a membership you can buy, and they have really great trading options as well. I attended, it's called the ACRE program, Authentic Canadian Real Estate Investing, and that was a really good weekend where I learned a lot. And then for garden suites, there is a really great website out there for Yeg Garden Suites where you can find out when they're going to have their next garden suite workshops. They do detailed workshops on how to build a garden suite in Edmonton, and in Calgary they've added as well. So check that out. Even another good thing they often offer is tours of different garden suites in Edmonton. With COVID, that's kind of been put on hold, but watch in the future, you might actually be able to go and check out some garden suites, and mine have often been featured on the tours. The Edmonton Landlord and Tenant Advisory Board is great for certain things as well. They sell tenancy forms like rental applications, tenancy agreements, inspection reports, and obviously using these documents makes sure you're falling within the laws in Alberta that we have. It also does answer questions from both landlords and tenants, and a lot of times I'll actually call them to confirm something, and then what I'll do is I'll tell the tenant, hey, here's a number you can call if you want to double check. I've already called them and this is how the rules work. And usually I already know the rule, but this gives validity where the tenant often won't even bother calling. They know that I know what I'm talking about and they'll do whatever it is I said for them to do. They also offer a landlord course that costs between $100 and $125, so that's really reasonable. In another resource is Service Alberta. They have a guide for tenants that's updated quite often, and it's useful to understand as a landlord, and at times I also send this to tenants. So I have a link to it here that you can use, and that often you can just take a snippet of something from there and send it to your tenants if you're having a debate on something. And then here's the link to the residential tenant dispute service that I already talked about. So lastly, I just wanted to show some pictures of some of my suites to give you an idea of what they look like. So this is an example of a basement suite that I have built in Edmonton. So this is the front of the house. This is the side door for the suite that's accessible through the back alley. And then this is some of the pictures of the basement suite when it was rented by tenants. So the living room, and then here's the kitchen. So this is a 1-bedroom basement suite. And this is the one that, in the example for $480, this was the type of property I was referencing. And then this is an example of some of my garden suites that I've been investing in too. So this one's a really nice suite that has a triple garage, so a double for the house, a single for the suite with a balcony above, and the suite is above the entire garage. There's a picture of the floor plan, what it looks like. It's very open. And then these two pictures are actually two different suites that I have garden suites in, and you can kind of see here it's just one suite for the house, one parking space for the house, and one for the suite, which is above the garage as well. And then this is another garden suite as well. So hopefully this has helped show some reasons for investing in real estate. And if you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to me and watch my other videos that I have on specific investing, like for garden suites. Thank you very much.